I'm going to show you how to win 90% of your NBA parlays in this video. So what we're going to focus on today is going to be an NBA same game parlay. I'm going to take you guys exactly through the strategy that I use to hit these at 90%, and you have to hit them at 90%, and I'm going to show you why and prove to you with using an example. So first off, it's going to be an SGP, okay? Same game parlay. Now I'm also going to use a live example in here that you guys could possibly use in the game for tonight. And I'm going to go through that example and go through the levels so that way you see exactly why most of your parlays that you put in lose most of the time, and the reason why, and why the ones that I'm showing you have the best possibility to win. So what we're going to do is we're going to segregate one player, okay? We're going to take one player here, and how we find that player is we're going to look at the matchups. So for example, tonight the Lakers are going against the Spurs. So what we want to look at in this matchup is we want to look at fantasy points and how we're going to correlate fantasy points to what's going to happen with real points, rebounds, and assists in that game. So if we look at fantasy points here and see what position do these teams allow the most to the opposing player in, which position we have to identify. But what you're going to do is I'm going to share the websites that you need at the end of this video, so make sure you guys stay to the end because I'm going to show you exactly the websites where you get this information. All right. Now, first thing is first, when you go and look at both of these teams, there's not too many positions that the Lakers allow a lot of fantasy points. They're actually pretty good on defense. All right, so there's really not going to be anybody from the Spurs that we're going to focus on here. But now, if we flip sides here and we look at the Spurs, they're vulnerable at the point guard position. Okay, and at the point guard position for LA is going to be who? Luka. All right, Luka Doncic is the point guard for the Lakers, and the Spurs actually give up the 5th most fantasy points. All right, we're going to put that down. The 5th most fantasy points to opposing point guards. So that's what we're going to take a look at. We're going to see exactly what inside Luka's stats actually gives us a edge overall and how we can actually use the same game parlay to exploit how he's going to play tonight. So the first thing we want to look at is how many fantasy points do the Spurs give up to opposing point guards. Now, the line on that is going to be they give up about 54 fantasy points to opposing point guards, all right, which is pretty good. I mean, that's a lot of points they give up. So it means Luka should have some opportunity to rack up some points, rebounds, and assists. Now, with fantasy points, the reason why we correlate real stats with fantasy points is because there's not really true data for exactly, points, rebounds, and assists that calculate exactly on cue, on point, exactly what they give up, okay? There's not really too much data on that. Now, you'd have to go through and manually do that game by game to come up with the average on that, but this is kind of the shortcut to it, okay? Because fantasy points correlates to points, rebounds, and assists most of the time, all right? So we're just going to correlate that so we see already that we have a good matchup here because, first off, Luka is going to be the highest usage player on the Lakers, okay? Easily. So that's another thing that you want to look at is you want to make sure that the player that you have down is one of the top usage percentage players on the team. And he is, okay? Everything goes through him for assists, points, rebounds, everything like that, okay? So, once again, let's go ahead and focus now on exactly how many projected minutes we can get Luka to play tonight. And how long is he going to play in the game? Because that correlates to how many points, rebounds, and assists he can rack up. So his projected minutes tonight are going to be 38. So he has 38 projected minutes. Now, if we look and see exactly how many fantasy points per minute he averages, we can get a good projection on his fantasy score of what we can get here, okay? So he averages 1.58 fantasy points per minute, all right? So if we take that and multiply 38, what we're going to get there is a projection of around 60 fantasy points, okay? And going against a team that gives up 54, what does that mean? It means he's more likely to obviously have a chance to reach his average of what he can get in fantasy points per minute times his minutes that he's going to play. So this step that I'm showing you right here is pretty much for verification of the player that we have written down, okay? So top usage player, so we verified that. They're going against the 5th most fantasy points to point guard in that position. He's going against a favorable matchup. He has that matchup. His projected fantasy points per minute and his minutes that he's playing projects him at a pretty high rate there. So overall, as long as he plays full game, doesn't get hurt or whatnot, or a blowout comes into factor where they're up by 30 in the 4th quarter and he sits, we should have a good shot at him getting a decent amount of points, rebounds, and assists to rack up those fantasy points. So now what we're going to do is we're going to separate his points, rebounds, and assists. We're going to separate those into separate categories to see how we can get ourselves an edge on a same game parlay that's almost like a no-brainer. If you guys want to fast forward through all this and you guys want the plays that fit all this criteria that I teach you day in and day out through all my videos, make sure you guys click the link in the description. So now let's go ahead and check out the numbers and how the numbers will work out here. All right, so we have Luka down for an SGP, okay, a same game parlay. Now let's go ahead and take his numbers in each category and let's decipher them to see which one we can smash together and is going to give us the biggest edge. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at here is let's look at where his averages are. We're going to say in the 80 percentile range through all three categories, which is points, rebounds, and assists. All right, so if we look at that category, he's been able to hit 25 plus points 82% of the time, okay? Now if we go to assists, he's been able to get at least 7, 82% of the time. Now if we go to rebounds, he's been able to get 6 plus 82% of the time. So we got three categories here that have 82% of the time. Your same game parlay would look like this, 25, 7, and 6. All right, so what are the odds that we're going to get on this? When we put those together, well, the odds we're going to get are minus 220. And that's going to give us an implied probability of 68%. Now, let's put the true probability down here. And how we're going to get the true probability is what's the actual probability that all three of these occur at the same time? Because you're going to need that on a same game parlay. You need them to hit this, this, and this. All of them. So what you do here is now, I use a calculator just to fast right through this, okay? So I use a probability calculator to put 3 events in there and what's the likelihood of those 3 events occurring, and it's going to give you a percentage. So when you put these 3 together, your true probability comes to 55%. So at 55%, you're giving yourself a negative 13% edge. So at this point, yes, the odds maybe seem a little bit attracting because they're a little bit lower, but your edge is a negative 13% edge. So that's not what you want, okay? We have to go through and find what level is actually going to give us an advantage and actually give us a plus edge, not a minus edge. Whereas this is where a lot of people make mistakes because they're trying to get lower odds. They're trying to cut it, you know, because they want to make more money on their play. So they're trying to take the better odds here, but then look what happens here. It gives you a negative edge. So over time, that's just going to lose you money. Actually, a tremendous amount of money because negative 13% edge is huge. So let's keep going through our list here and find where that positive edge is going to land. So we've seen that that level wasn't going to work. All right, so let's try a new level here. Again, we're looking at Luka for the SGP. So let's say for points, 20 plus. All right, we're going to say 20 plus there. He's been able to hit that 94% of the time. Assists, we're going to go 6 plus here. He's been able to hit that 94% of the time. And then we get to rebounds here, and we go 5 plus rebounds. He's actually been able to get that 100% of the time. So this looks a little bit better than the last one, obviously, right? This one looks like you could achieve this easily. So we got 20 points, 20 points, 6 assists, 5 rebounds. If we put these together, our implied probability now, mashing these together on a same game parlay, is going to be minus 500, okay? Which is going to give us now a percentage of 83%, okay? That's our implied probability. Now, our true probability, when we put these together, a 94%, 94%, 100%, is actually 88%. So this now has transformed into a plus 5% edge at this level. So yeah, the odds are pretty high here, and it doesn't look like, oh, this is something that's that attracting, but you have a 5% edge here and an 88% chance for this to actually go and win. Now let's go ahead and take it one more step further here, okay? Because there's one more level that I want to look at. So if we go down here and we go points, we go 20 plus, we go assists, we go 5 plus, and rebounds, we go 5 plus. What we get here now is going to be interesting. We get 94% on the points, but 100% on assists and 100% on rebounds. So now this is going to take, our odds are going to go up a little bit, obviously, but our true probability should probably go up, right? Because now we have 200% stats here that we're looking at. So now the odds when you put these together is going to be minus 650, okay? Which is going to give us an implied probability now of 86%. But now, true probability wise, if we put all these together, what's our true probability going to be with 100%, 100%, and 94%? That comes out to be 94%, giving us now a plus 8% edge. So when we go ahead and take a look now, what we see is when we tried to undercut the odds and try to get shorter odds so that way we have a bigger payout, we actually gave ourselves a negative 13% edge. Now, when we jacked our odds up a little bit more here, yes, you're paying a decent price here, okay, which would scare 90% of the public away. They wouldn't make a play like this, okay? They wouldn't do it. Because why? They think, oh, it's just not worth it. But look at the edges that you get here. You got an 8% edge here and a 5% edge here. So pretty much, if he just doesn't get hurt in the game, even if he only plays 3 quarters, most likely he would get both of these if he just played 3 quarters. As long as he doesn't get injured in the game. You're pretty much banking on him not getting injured in the game, because that's pretty much what you're looking at here. Because you have such a high percentage of him being able to achieve this that it's insane, all right? You have a great edge on both of these. Now, I'm not saying you consistently go out and bet these type of plays, okay? I'm not saying that. But these are one-off ones for same-game parlays that could give you an edge in a game. Yeah, you're not going to make a lot, but you're most likely going to win. That is how they end up playing out. Now, let's go ahead and get to the websites that I use for this information that I come across, okay? So first off, if you want to look at the fantasy points allowed, there you go to Fantasy Pros. And in Fantasy Pros, you put defense versus position in the NBA section, all right? That's where you find how many points that team gives up per position, fantasy points. Now, usage rate. Now for the usage rate, okay, usage percentage, that you could use on Roto Grinders. Under there, you go to Lineup HQ and you scroll all the way to the far right and you'll see exactly the usage number there. And you can also get the projected minutes that they're going to play on there as well. And that's where you find the fantasy points per minute. They're all literally right in the Lineup HQ that's listed. And then which sportsbook gives you those odds that I showed you? Well, the sportsbook that I used for that was DraftKings under same game parlay. All right, that's what I used to come up with those odds that I showed you, those implied odds, and obviously put those towards your true probability to come up with your edge. And then the calculator for the percentages, you know, when you put 3 of them together, the percent of all 3 happening is going to be the Omni calculator, okay? That's what you do. Just go to Google, put in Omni calculator, put in literally 3 events occurring. Okay, you put in that, and then it's going to give you exactly the calculator where you can calculate that, and it does it all for you. It makes it super easy.